Yasin Asensem says, "Hi Luke, I want to ask you about how to prepare to or for the Ielts exam." So, it's a great question. First, should you prepare for the Ielts exam? Should you take the Ielts exam? Well, some people have to. If you are a student who wants to study, for example, in the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, maybe South Africa, you probably have to take the Ielts exam. The best score on the Ielts exam is a 9, but most schools would regard something like a 6.5 or a 7, they have different requirements, as passable. Right? So a 9 is not the expectation. That's the highest possible score. Whereas a 5 or 5.5 or even sometimes a 6 is not high enough. Now, the Ielts has 4 parts. There's the reading part, there's the speaking part, there's the listening part, and there is the writing part. Did I say all? Is that all 4? Did I repeat any? Yeah. Reading, listening, speaking, writing. Right. So, sorry, there's a thing in my eye. So, how do you prepare for this exam which has these 4 parts? And I think there are a couple of big ideas that you should keep in mind and then a few specific ideas. And this is not going to be complete because there's no way within a period of a few minutes that I could tell you everything that you need to know about how to prepare for the Ielts exam. It's a big exam. You have to work at it very hard. There are people who dedicate all of their time to preparing, helping people prepare for the Ielts exam. Teachers who have YouTube channels focused on only Ielts. So just know that I'm not going to be able to give you an answer that will satisfy you completely, but I will do my best. You should probably go on wherever you are, YouTube, Facebook, and find a channel that is focused on Ielts. That will be a good idea. Okay, so the first thing is that you have to be extremely familiar with all the parts and what all the parts look like. So if you go out and you buy one of those sample books to see sample answers, the value of that, one of those Ielts test prep books, buy it. Yeah, great. The value of that, though, is not in, oh, I need to learn exactly how to say what is in the sample answer. That's not the point, really. The value of it is to, number one, learn how the test works. What is the expectation on the writing part? How is it graded? What are they looking for? Is using idioms more important? Or is it more important that I use perfect, complete sentences, even if I don't use a lot of complicated idioms and vocabulary? And then generally there is a hierarchy there where, yes, if you use a very difficult word or idiom, that's great, but it has to fit inside of a really good sentence. And that will be a priority. Having clear sentences, even if they're a little simpler, is better than terrible sentences, terrible grammar, and really professional words. So you have to figure out what the hierarchy, what the order is of importance. What's the priority for the person who's evaluating you? And reading one of those books is actually a good way to figure that out. You get a guide of what's important and how things are graded. What does it look like to get an 8? What does it look like to get a 9? Doesn't mean you need to get an 8 or a 9, but you have to know what the requirements are, not only for the writing part, but also the reading part, the listening part, and the speaking part. When it comes to the speaking part, it's extremely important to have a feeling for what is expected of the person who's giving the answer, what the person who's evaluating you is kind of looking for. And again, checking out another channel that's focused on Ielts, that's a good idea, or getting one of those books and looking at sample answers and getting familiar with the kind of prompts that you get. For example, in the speaking part, there are 3 parts. There are 3 questions in the speaking part of the Ielts test. Question 1, they don't want you to just talk and talk and talk. It's okay if you give a very short and sweet and simple answer to the questions that they ask, because the first part is really just breaking the ice and getting some basic information. The second part is a lot more important than the first part. The second part is where you have to be able to organize your thoughts clearly. You have to make sure you include all of the elements or pieces of the question in your answer. You have to be a storyteller. You have to be able to talk about basic details and then make the person listening to you feel like you know how to express your memories. You know how to talk about what happened to you. You can tell a story. And that's very important as well, right? And then for part 3, which builds on part 2, sort of follow-up questions to part 2, then you have to be able to deal with live situation. You don't know what they're going to ask you. You don't know what they're going to say. You can prepare for part 2 pretty well because the questions are very structured. You know what they're kind of going to look like, and they really just change out the topics. But the question has the same format, right? So if you prepare in your mind for 100 question possibilities, and you say, okay, if they ask me this, I'll say something like this, and they ask me this, I'll say something like that. You can prepare for that, but you don't know what they're going to ask you in part 3, right? And that is true for each part. So, if you want to prepare for IELTS, be a fluent knower, this sounds silly, a fluent knower of the format of the test itself. Deeply know the test. Deeply know how it works. Number 2, get ready for what they might ask you. Prepare your mind for the possibility of being asked about this or that, and then practice giving answers. Practice, practice, practice. Not only input, but also output. So that comes to the output part. When you're getting ready for doing something, when you're getting ready to have output, you need to do output, right? And so the most important thing you can do is practice writing. Practice organizing and writing quickly based on prompts from the IELTS book that you get. Practice prompts, practice questions. Write 1 or 2 or 3 answers per day if you're serious about it. Do it so that it's easy for you to at least do it, even if it's not perfect. For the speaking part, if you can, get a teacher who can give you feedback. It would probably be worth some 1-to-1 lessons. Take 15 lessons with a teacher. Spend some money on it. Spend money on that, right? Because they can give you feedback. They can tell you what sounds natural, what sounds unnatural. They can give you feedback that you can't see yourself, okay? But then, once you're done with that, or during that process, then practice doing the speaking parts, especially part 2 and part 3, by recording yourself. You have one of the questions from part 2. You have to include different parts of the question in your answer, okay? So you pick one question at random. You pull it out of a hat. You have many questions prepared, and you mix them up and pull it out at random. Then you try your best to answer the question, including all the parts. You're recording it, and I would recommend using software called Otter, which not only records it, O-T-T-E-R, but also gives you a transcript of what you said in real time that you can review. Then look back at what you said and take notes. What could you do better? What did you say that sounds weird? Is there any strange grammar? Try to make progress there. At the very least, doing this, input, learning the structure, and output, practicing all the parts again and again and again, you're going to feel more confident. And confidence is a big part of doing well on an exam. So even if you don't get a 9 or an 8 or even a 7.5, you might be able to get a 7 because you feel good going into it. Whereas if you go into it nervous and shaking and I don't know what's going to happen, I don't know what's going on, then you're going to perform worse, not because you're not smart or you're not capable, but because you don't feel ready. But if you put in the hard work of knowing everything that you can know about the exam, knowing all the kinds of questions that they might ask you, practicing many, many times per day in the 2 months leading up to the exam, you'll have a much higher chance of success. Much higher chance. And it's not a bad idea to practice with a teacher. It is not a bad idea. Also, I would say, you don't want to plan answers word for word. Some of you will have heard me say this before, but if you say, all right, I'm going to write down an answer word for word and actually have it checked, edited for me, and if they ask me a question like this, I'm going to give this answer. Don't do that. Don't do that. Number one, they can tell. They can tell, and you will get marked way down for that. Number two, it might not fit the question that you've been asked. So if you're answering something similar to the question, obviously you're just memorizing it, you're not really answering the question, then you're going to get an even lower score on that part. So one of the big mistakes people make is, I need to prepare every word of my answers for the speaking part. No, you don't. No, you don't. You should be mentally ready for what they might ask you. But like if they say this, I might answer this kind of thing. This is my story that I'll share. But it should be natural. It should be you. They want to know how good your English is. And if you're memorizing stuff, they can tell. They're trained to know how to tell that and give you a score accordingly, which you will not be happy about. So hopefully that at least gives you a picture of this. Again, as I said, it's not complete. There's a lot more to say about IELTS. It's a very good exam, I think. It's a good way to evaluate whether someone has a high level of English or not. I think it's pretty good. So good luck. And if you haven't considered taking it before, it might be worth signing up just to see where you are. How good are you? It's a good measurement, actually. Guys, if you haven't already, make sure you hit the like button. I would really appreciate that. Also, don't forget to subscribe and check out my full courses in the links in the description. While I don't have an IELTS course, there is one course called Building Your English Brain, which prepares you for thinking in English, how to think in English, which is something that can be very useful, can come in handy for the IELTS test. Okay? Hopefully that helps.